Welcome to Rooted in History. What did you eat today? Did you have breakfast? Maybe some lunch? Dinner? Snacks? Chances are that whatever you ate today was delicious and convenient. You might have picked up a pre-made meal from the grocery store, or ordered food to be delivered right to your door. But for most of human history, especially ancient Rome, this kind of lifestyle was unheard of. Preparing meals was time-consuming and dangerous work. Food had to be gathered, prepared, and cooked with little technology to help. And if you didn't prepare your meals correctly, you could end up dead. Thankfully, that doesn't happen anymore, unless you're trying to make sushi. Still, it wasn't too long ago that our lives were much more difficult than they are now. In fact, there was one man who lived thousands of years ago who really changed the way that food and life were done in ancient Rome. Today, let's take a look at how one general changed ancient Rome forever. This man would grow up to be one of the most powerful men in the world, but his rise to power was not an easy one. Gaius Julius Caesar was born on July 13, 100 BC in Rome. Like many young boys in Roman society, he was sent to be educated outside of his family home. His father had passed away when he was only 8 years old, so his mother was likely relieved to send him off to school. She had remarried and she wanted her new husband to be able to enjoy his life without the hassle of having a teenager around. While attending school, he studied rhetoric, poetry, and philosophy. He excelled at these subjects, but he also took an interest in politics. It's believed that while Caesar was still in school, he wrote several poems dedicated to the goddess of love, Venus. He had hoped that one day his teacher, the poet Hortensius, would see these poems and realize just how talented his student was. However, Hortensius never read them, and Caesar ended up switching teachers. When Caesar was about 17, he began studying under another famous Roman orator named Brutus, but he was soon called back to Rome by his worried mother. The year before, Rome had descended into civil war after a group of Roman generals seized control of the government. The Marian and the Sullan factions fought each other bitterly. Caesar's mother wanted him out of the city because she feared that the violence would engulf their family. While living away from Rome, he worked hard to improve himself, and he returned to the city once it was safe to do so. With his education complete, he was ready to begin his adult life. Now that he was older, he began looking for a wife, but he needed the approval of his mother and stepfather to do so. Unfortunately, his stepfather hated him and didn't want him to marry. For 3 straight years, Caesar was denied permission to get married. He finally gave in to his stepfather's wishes and married his daughter instead. However, he did not need to be married to find women, because he had quite a few affairs throughout his life. One of his mistresses even bore him a son, although his identity is a mystery. Some believe that he was gay, but this is largely debated among historians. We may never know the truth, but what we do know is that Caesar's personal life was colorful, to say the least. Although he was born into wealth, Caesar knew that he needed to make a name for himself if he was going to make anything of his life, so he decided to join the military. As a young soldier, he served under a general named Lucius Cornelius Sulla, who was one of the main figures in the war that had taken place a few years earlier. Sulla had been victorious in the conflict, but he had also lost much of his popularity among the people. Because of this, he asked Caesar to marry his daughter in order to gain favor with the populace. However, Caesar had already married his own daughter, so he refused Sulla's offer. Sulla was furious at this slight and banished Caesar from Rome. Caesar fled to the city of Brundisium, where he lived in poverty for a time. When his wife heard about his situation, she agreed to divorce him so that he could marry Sulla's daughter instead. Once this was done, Caesar was welcomed back into Roman society. It seemed like Caesar was finally destined for greatness, but it was short. Sulla suddenly became very ill and passed away. The entire political climate of Rome shifted. Now that Sulla was gone, Caesar found himself back on the streets, this time with a price on his head. He escaped to the Greek island of Rhodes, where he lived in hiding for a time. Eventually, the danger had passed and he returned to Rome. He was given command of a military legion and sent to conquer territory in northern Africa. He led his soldiers through the wilderness, enduring harsh weather conditions. At one point, they were almost completely wiped out by a group of Gauls. Still, he managed to pull his exhausted soldiers together and defeat their enemies. When he returned to Rome, he was hailed as a hero. His political career began to take off and he became a military tribune in 79 BC. He was involved in the suppression of a revolt in Asia Minor. During this campaign, he rescued an important Roman senator named Marcus Junius Brutus. This event would be important later in his life. After this, he served as a military officer during the conquest of further Gaul, where he gained more glory for Rome. But once again, he found himself exiled from the city. This time, however, he wasn't alone. In 70 BC, Gaius Marius, who had been the general of Rome during its civil war, ran for consul. He won the election, but his supporters and opponents brawled in the streets, killing dozens. Caesar used this opportunity to return to Rome and seize control of the government. He appointed himself as Pontifex Maximus, or High Priest, which gave him control over religious affairs. He was hugely popular with the common people because he hosted feasts and distributed free grain to all citizens. However, he made powerful enemies while he was in office. One of those enemies was Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, or Pompey the Great, who was another famous Roman general. Pompey had been a child during the events of Caesar's youth and had spent his time in school, sharpening his skills as a politician and warrior. He had taken part in the third myth. He was triumphant in the war and was celebrated with a triumphal procession upon his return to Rome. He had made enemies with a man named Marcus Licinius. Crassus had wanted to be the one to lead the war effort, but Pompey had been chosen instead. Crassus was furious and vowed revenge. As Caesar's popularity grew, he began to make enemies as well. When his term as Pontifex Maximus ended, he tried to run for the position of consul. However, the voting senators opposed him and chose another candidate instead. Caesar was outraged and he made plans to retaliate. He went to the Forum and surrounded it with armed soldiers. He then marched to the Senate and announced that he was the new consul. The senators were furious and declared him an enemy of Rome. He fled to the north, where he raised an army and began marching on Rome. Along his journey, he met up with Pompey and made peace with him. They formed a coalition with a third influential politician named Marcus Aemilius, and the three of them divided the provinces of the Roman Empire among themselves. Caesar was given control of Cisalpine Gaul, but he ended up conquering more territory than was rightfully his. He then invaded northern Italy, where he defeated his enemies and laid siege to the city of El. At this time, he was approached by a delegation from the Senate, who offered him peace and made him consul for the next year. He held the position of consul alongside Pompey and Lepidus. Together, the three men were known as the First Trio. While holding this position, Caesar helped pass laws that benefited the poor. He also reformed the calendar and created the Julian calendar, which is the basis for the Gregorian calendar used in most of the world today. He did not run for re-election as consul, however, and instead went to Gaul to put down a revolt. He spent 5 years conquering new territory and defeating enemies. At one point, he had to flee for his life after crossing the river Rubicon. This event marked the beginning of a civil war between him and the Senate. With the support of the common people behind him, Caesar was able to raise an army and fight back against the Senate. He fought against Pompey in a series of battles across the Mediterranean, including the Battle of Pharsalus in Greece. There, Caesar's army bested the senators and Pompey was forced to flee. Caesar chased after him to Egypt, where he was assassinated by a group of senators, including Marcus Junius Brutus, whom Caesar had saved during the war. When Caesar was brought to the capital, his body was paraded through the streets by the victors. His head was chopped off and displayed from the Capitol building. Although he was dead, the people of Rome mourned him and his legacy lived on. Click here to watch one of these next videos and let us know in the comments who you think was a greater leader, Julius Caesar or Genghis Khan.